In the Impact segment tonight, undermining President Trump. Amid the chaos surrounding the Russia and wiretapping investigations, the White House is trying to highlight what the outgoing Obama administration may have done to undercut the Trump team.
I think that the revelations of Evelyn Farkas, who played a senior role in the Obama administration, going on the record to talk about how they politically used classified information is troubling. Day by day, more and more we are seeing that the substance of what we've been talking about continues to move exactly in the direction that the president spoke about in terms of surveillance that occurred. And that should be very troubling.
For context, these are the remarks made by that Obama staffer earlier this month that Sean Spicer is referring to.
I had a fear that somehow that information would disappear with the senior people who left. So it would be hidden away in the bureaucracy, that the Trump folks, if they found out how we knew what we knew about the Trump staff dealing with Russians, that they would try to compromise those sources and methods, meaning we would no longer have access to that intelligence. So I became very worried because not enough was coming out into the open, and I knew that there was more. We have very good intelligence on Russia. So then I had talked to some of my former colleagues, and I knew that they were trying to also help get information to the Hill.
A lot going on today.
Yeah.
Mark
That's
Halpern.
why you have the leaking.
But in an interview with the Daily Caller yesterday, Farkas said that her comments have been misconstrued, stating that she was not in possession of intelligence about Trump or his advisors, and she did not share any documents with Congress. Joining us now with a reaction from Richmond, Virginia, Fox News contributor Charlie Hurt, and from Little Rock, Arkansas, General Wesley Clark, the former Supreme Allied Commander of NATO. So, General Clark, boiling it down, what Farkas admitted to was that Obama intelligence officials gathered information about Trump and conversations that he was having, squirreled those intelligence nuggets away, hiding them from the Trump transition team, and then had people leak them, illegally leak them, because it was classified, to members of the media and Democrats on Capitol Hill. Does that bother you?
Well, honestly, I don't know what happened. I mean, I heard that statement. I saw stuff come out, but I also saw a lot of other things that confused me during that period. During that period, I saw President-elect Trump. It was as though he was already president. He was making statements. He was telling what he was going to do. He was trying to basically brush off the findings of the intelligence community that Russia had interfered in the election. I mean, that's what was stated. And so I just think it's one of those ugly periods in a transition of presidential administrations. I think we ought to move on and put it behind us and look into the future. I mean, President Trump has got some remarkable initiatives underway. Some of them are very promising. I'm really excited about the National Association of Manufacturers saying that their sentiment is much higher, that they're going to invest more and create new jobs. I know foreign countries are going to invest here. I think that's all great. But I do think it's incumbent upon the American people and the Congress and the executive branch and the Federal Bureau of Investigation to get to the bottom of Russia's interference in the election, because that's something that's unprecedented.
Yes.
Never happened before.
In a way.
And we need to know what happened, because
no,
we
listen,
want
to know what happened
process.
too, and I think everybody wants to know what happened. But right now it looks like there's a lot of innuendo floating around. It's pretty irresponsible. And I would also agree that it was an ugly period, that transition, because you had former administration officials actively undermining a president-elect. Charlie, there seems to be more and more evidence piling up day after day that there was an aggressive campaign to undermine the president-elect. You've seen it in the New York Times. You've seen it by Farkas, this woman on MSNBC. The leaks that have come out. There's a mounting evidence that this is happening. At what point does it become, you know what, this is the story now, not so-called weird connections between Trump and Russia?
In the current media environment, I don't know that it ever that ever occurs. But it is truly amazing because, as we've pointed out, there are all of these unanswered questions. In fact, they haven't even been asked yet about the efforts to undermine the incoming the transition team and the incoming new president. If indeed, and there is evidence to suggest that it has happened, see Mike Flynn, if in fact that is what happened, all of this business about Russian connections, murky connections that, by the way, have been exhaustively researched and investigated for months now, we now know, none of that pales in comparison to the idea that you have the most powerful espionage assets of the United States government being used by an administration to spy on a political opponent before, during, and after that political opponent wins the presidency. That is like on the level of constitutional crisis.
Right.
Which I think is a big reason why we have seen so much sort of unusual activity with Devin Nunes going to the White House, going to the White House to see things, going to the White House to brief the president. It's because we've never been here before. And anybody who has seen movies like the Edward Snowden movie, about all the massive collection that goes on, anybody who has the slightest concern about that, they do care about this. And they care about that a whole lot more than they care about Russian connections,
right.
Because this has to do with the integrity of our intelligence community and the ability of us to not be spied on by our own government.
It's not just about the integrity of the election, which we know now was not rigged in Trump's favor by the Russians. It's about the abuse of power potentially by an administration against an incoming administration. General, real quick, just to wrap this up, the motivation, do you think if indeed this did happen, is this just Obama officials caught by surprise at the Trump victory and trying to salvage his legacy, knowing they're shut out of power in the House, the Senate, and the White House? I mean, that's got to be the motivation if you were to speculate.
There are so many things that you and have covered here that it's really difficult to take it apart. But let's put it this way. First of all, the Russia connection has not been exhaustively investigated. Secondly, that would be a constitutional crisis if we had an election system that a foreign power could come in and influence effectively. That has not yet been exhaustively run down. Every transition has its rough spots, and every transition is different than the other. I remember in the 1980 transition, there were concerns that Ronald Reagan was undercutting the effort to get the hostages out of Iran. But here's what's different about this transition. President-elect Trump said he didn't trust the intelligence community. And so naturally,
well, I mean, General, would you trust the intelligence community if they were potentially unmasking your associates and then leaking things to the mainstream media? I wouldn't trust them.
First of all,
listen, General and Charlie.
The Washington Times has lived off the leaks from the intelligence community.
Okay, but so has the New York Times and so has the Washington Post. And that's why they don't care about these leaks, because they're making money off of them.
For the intelligence community.
I know.
So I believe in the men and women who serve our country.
I do too, but you have to admit
get to the bottom of the Russian connection first.
Fishy going on. General Charlie, thank you very much.
I agree.
Up next.
Democrats accusing House Intelligence Committee Chairman Devin Nunes of getting in the way of the Russia investigation. But a Wall Street Journal editorial piece says Nunes has seen dozens of documents with information on Trump officials. And the information in those files was not related to Russia. The reports masked identities, but made it obvious which Trump officials were being discussed. At least one Trump official besides Michael Flynn was unmasked. These documents were circulated at the highest levels of government. And the bottom line is that President Obama's team was spying on the incoming administration. Mike Pregent is a former intelligence officer. Mike, this is so much for all of us to take in, and we continue to get new details by the hour, it seems. What do you make of the latest revelations on this?
Well, there was obvious surveillance of the Trump thing, and thanks for having me, Sandra. What we learned, what the Washington Post and the New York Times learned on December 29th, was that General Michael Flynn, the incoming National Security Advisor, had a conversation with the Russian ambassador. And that information was leaked. And that information is what we call raw intelligence. It's the highest classified level of signals intelligence intercept. And what it contains is the cell phone number, and the geolocation of that phone call, both Mike Flynn's cell phone and location and the ambassador's location. And that is not supposed to be leaked to the press. I mean, as a former intelligence officer, I would go to jail for doing something like that. So that sparked this whole thing about we need to get to the bottom of where these leaks are. Now we learn that there were other officials that were reverse targeted. And what that means is you don't have to have a FISA order in place. You simply go after the foreign entities that are already under legitimate FISA orders, and you target them, and what you're really looking for is anytime they talk to a Trump team member. And then those names are unmasked, and they're made widely available to individuals in the intelligence community, and in some cases leaked.
So according to our latest Fox News reporting, our reporter Adam Housley has disclosed that Nunes knew about the existence of these intelligence documents back in January, well before the Trump tweet or meeting with the president. He spent weeks trying to find a way to see this, but he was stonewalled, and the only option was to go to the White House. The chairman had to figure out a way to actually view these documents, and this was the last option. Well,
this is what's important about these documents. You can't email them. You can't make a photocopy of them. You can't take notes on them. What happens when a decision maker or somebody who's cleared, has a clearance, asks to see raw intelligence, somebody from the National Security Agency or somebody cleared physically walks that information over to that decision maker, shows them the information, he or she. They look at it. They can't take notes. They can't photocopy it. They can't do anything to email it to anybody. So it's a hard copy. Then it's put back in a briefcase, taken back to the safe, and locked away in a SCIF. So when Nunes went to the National Security Council to look at this document, and intelligence officers with top secret clearances showed it to him in a SCIF, that was done right. The biggest problem is the intelligence community didn't share that with the head of the House Senate Committee, or the House Intelligence Committee.
What did you make of the references to Dr. Evelyn Farkas? There was a couple exchanges in the White House briefing room just then. She said back in an interview on another network early March, she told the Hill people to get as much information as you can before President Obama leaves the administration, because she fears that somehow it'll disappear. They made reference to that. Sean Spicer basically said that was her on the record saying that Trump's team was spied on.
Well, more damning than that, in that news interview with Mika on Morning Joe, she said if the Trump team knew how we got the information, they would try to expose our tactics. She hinted that those tactics were illegal surveillance and collection of Trump team members using reverse targeting, meaning, again, going after legitimate foreign targets that are FISA cleared to reverse target Trump officials. So it's very important that she be subpoenaed and talked to, because she left the administration in 2015 to join the Hillary Clinton campaign, and now she's coordinating with Obama officials in the NSC and the IC post-election to discredit the Trump administration as they come into power. That's a problem.
What you heard from Sean Spicer just then, and you heard it over and over, and you just heard it from John Roberts, is that he continues to emphasize that the media is worrying more about the date and process than the substance here, that we should all be focusing on the leaks. That's what the American people should be concerned about.
Right.
And he continues to say that Nunes' visit to the White House was routine and proper. How much of this is just getting lost in the messaging from the White House? Are they being clear about what they know, what they have, and what they can reveal to the American public?
Well, this is highly classified, so you can't reveal it to the American public, and you can't email it to somebody. But what the American people should know is it's a felony to leak classified information to the press. It's a felony to unmask U.S. persons, and it's a felony to illegally target a political opponent. It's not illegal or a felony to allow the chairman of the House Intel Committee to come into and talk to somebody in the National Security Council. So one's a felony, one's a check on a visitation log to bring somebody in.
So he did say he's going to ensure that the documents from the NSC staff will be turned over to Intel communities. Obviously, we're going to have to see how these investigations continue to play out in the House and the Senate. A lot going on. Michael Pregent, thanks for sticking around, and thanks for coming on with us.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Secretary of State Rex Tillerson is telling NATO allies it's time to pay up. Tillerson has given NATO partners a deadline to come up with plans to chip in more for their own defense. Correspondent Rich Edson reports tonight from Brussels.
Secretary of State Rex Tillerson went to his first NATO meeting and gave U.S. allies an assignment. Those failing to meet the NATO defense spending threshold should offer a plan on how they'll eventually honor that commitment.
Ensuring that NATO has all of the resources, financial and otherwise, that are necessary for NATO to fulfill its mission.
Secretary Tillerson gave them less than 2 months, May 25th. That's the next NATO leaders meeting. In 2014, NATO leaders agreed to move towards a target of spending 2% of the size of their country's economies on defense. The U.S., United Kingdom, Poland, Greece, and Estonia are the only 5 NATO countries reaching that target. There are 28 nations in NATO. As for the U.S. response, if NATO countries fail to spend more on defense, State Department officials refuse to say. The German foreign minister is already pushing back on the U.S. request. Reuters reports Foreign Minister Sigmar Gabriel responded, quote, 2% would mean military expenses of some 70 billion euros. I don't know any German politician who would claim that is reachable nor desirable. Before reprimanding NATO allies on defense spending, Secretary Tillerson opened his remarks to international counterparts, stressing the U.S. commitment to NATO is strong and the alliance remains the bedrock for transatlantic security, a message of relief for some.
I remember at the beginning of the presidency, there was saying, okay, NATO is not so important anymore. It is not the key for security. Now we see that the United States says, no, it is the cornerstone of transatlantic alliance.
Secretary Tillerson also warned Russia that NATO is fundamental to countering Russian agitation and aggression.
He gave a very strong message, stressing that the United States is together with Ukraine in fighting the Russian aggression.
Ukraine's foreign minister also says Tillerson promised the United States would maintain sanctions against Russia until it honors ceasefire agreements in Ukraine. NATO leaders also discussed counterterrorism and fighting ISIS, as there are still questions over formulating strategy, like whether the Trump administration will look to work with Russia on trying to fight ISIS, and what the future of Syria may be, and whether Syrian President Bashar al-Assad will be a part of it. Chris.
Rich Edson reporting live from Brussels. Rich, thank you.
It is stark division that is playing out in every corner of politics right now. And it's on full display in the mainstream media's coverage of the Mike Flynn wiretap Russia intel investigations. As for the latest on Flynn, the former national security advisor is seeking an immunity deal in exchange for testimony to FBI and congressional investigators. The deal has reportedly been rejected by the Senate Intel Committee. And Congressman Adam Schiff, the House Intel Committee's ranking member, says they'll discuss the offer with Senate and Justice Department counterparts before making a decision. Meanwhile, the media's coverage of the Flynn news, breathless.
Overnight, President Trump's former national security advisor, Mike Flynn, making headlines requesting immunity in exchange for testifying about his Russian contacts.
Flynn wants a promise of legal protection before testifying about the Trump campaign and Russian meddling in the election.
Michael Flynn, who was ousted as President Trump's national security advisor, is now offering to testify if he is given immunity from prosecution.
And top Democratic leaders are wasting no time using the Flynn developments to fuel more rank speculation against President Trump.
I just wonder what the Russians have politically, personally, or financially on President Trump, because this is about a national security issue. Why would the President of the United States just come in and start to flirt with the idea of lifting sanctions on Russia in terms of their behavior in Eastern Europe? Why would the President of the United States question the START treaty? Why the question of the United States put Putin on a pedestal and diminish the greatness of America in that? There's something wrong with this picture.
Joining us now with reaction from Washington, Matt Schlapp, chairman of the American Conservative Union, along with former State Department official David Tafori. Matt, I'll start with you. It seems like if the press had been as aggressive covering this IRS scandal, I mean, they didn't do anything about that. I mean, you had Lois Lerner taking the Fifth, people taking plea deals, and they didn't really care at all. But all of a sudden, you know, Mike Flynn makes a phone call and, you know, all hell breaks loose. Why is all of a sudden everybody in Washington an investigative reporter?
Yeah. Well, this is something you're going to have to learn, Jesse, which is Republicans tend to be very careful and sheepish when it comes to going after Democrats for scandals and investigations, whereas Democrats, you know, I got to take my hat off to them. Every moment of every day, they try to make every Republican feel like they're a criminal. Think about this case. Mike Flynn is the victim. He was unmasked, and his identity was leaked to major news publications. And now it's the Democrats saying somehow that Mike Flynn is the one who is the person who has committed, has broken the law. It's ironic how they turn everything on its head.
Well, there's no evidence so far to come out that he's broken any law. David, it seems to be funny that when Hillary's associates all got immunity deals, and that was fine. But Mike Flynn casually asked for an immunity deal, and all of a sudden the press brands him some criminal. Don't you see a little bit of a double standard there?
This should not be a Democrat or Republican thing. This should be something that all Americans care about. The framers of our Constitution were really worried about interference by foreign governments. That's why they put in the Constitution protections so that foreign governments couldn't interfere in our democracy. That's at base what happened here. Russia interfered in our election. Now, for Matt to say that Flynn is a victim is unbelievable. Flynn has said he wants immunity from prosecution, means he's suggesting that he's committed crimes and he wants immunity to give evidence to talk about other people who have engaged in crimes.
If he was,
that's why you asked for immunity.
No,
David,
it's not true.
If he was unmasked, then he was a victim. That's hard to argue against.
No.
Yes, you can't unmask someone. That's a criminal abuse of power.
Sorry, Jesse, you're incorrect. If
no,
you
I'm
are
not.
Let me explain. If you are unmasked because you were in conversations with someone who was properly surveilled, like an agent of the Russian government, which is what happened here, that is not improper. In fact, that's what the law requires. You unmask Americans who are caught up in conversations.
But we don't know if he was unmasked appropriately and he was leaked to the mainstream media.
If it was leaked, now that may be a problem. And if someone
If it was leaked, it was leaked. It was leaked. And Mike Flynn, let me explain something.
David, let Matt finish. Go ahead, Matt.
The reason he wants immunity, and I would want it if I were him as well, is because this is how he's been treated by our government. They've already committed unlawful acts against him, and he has a story to tell. In order to go to Congress, he no longer has a trust factor with those who will be asking him the questions. And I don't blame him for having that lack of trust, and I think the American people would like some fairness here.
David,
Matt, you're living in a fantasy world.
Let's address this.
Immunity because you've committed a crime and you want protection against being prosecuted. Now, if people leaked that information and that was classified information, we should go after them too. But we need to go after both the leakers and the people who were unmasked, who improperly and potentially engaged in treason against our country by dealing with the Russians in a way that hurts our country's interests.
David, hold on a second. There's no evidence there was treason, number one. Number two, there's more evidence that the Democratic Party's in cahoots with the media and these leakers than there's evidence that Trump was in cahoots with the Russians. It's all smoke, no fire, and we haven't gotten to the bottom of any of this, and the media doesn't care about the fact that there's potential abuse of power, that President Obama and holdover officials might have surveilled a president-elect and then illegally unmasked him and then leaked classified information to the press. To me, that seems like the juicier story. And instead of covering that, it's a process crime now about when the House Intelligence Committee went to the White House, when did he go, who let him in. The real story, to me, seems to be the abuse of power.
The story that American people care about is whether a foreign power engaged in interference in our democracy. That's the most important story, and that's the real threat to America.
David, how many votes did the Russians change on Election Day? How many votes did they change?
All Americans care about that,
Answer the question. David, how many votes did the Russians change on November 8th?
The point is that the Russians...
Zero. It's better. Let me jump in here for a second.
We don't know that. Obama intelligence officials said that in open testimony. I'll give you the last word.
Yeah, let me just say real fast, which is, if the Russians tried to influence our elections, which, by the way, I think they tried to.
What do you mean?
Let me tell you something.
17 intelligence agencies in America said they did.
There's
no if anymore, Matt. There's no if.
They try to influence and destabilize America every day of the calendar year. Do you know whose fault that is? That is President Obama's fault for leaving us vulnerable. Let's really focus on what these investigations should be on, and it's Obama's failure.
That's a good point. It all happened under Obama's watch. Guys, thank you very much.
If you're not guilty of a crime, what do you need immunity for, right?
When you are given immunity, that means that you've probably committed a crime.
What he's asking is go testify. Go get it out there. Do what you have to do to get there and tell Congress and tell everyone exactly what we've been saying for a long time.
Donald Trump and Michael Flynn back in September when the issue was immunity for Clinton aides in the email investigation, and Sean Spicer today when the issue was whether Michael Flynn should get immunity in the Russia investigation. Time to bring in our panel. Daniel Halper of the New York Post, Mercedes Schlapp, columnist for the Washington Times, and Tim Farley, host of Morning Briefing POTUS on Sirius XM Radio. So let's take a look at the presidential tweet last night that got this debate over immunity going again. After the story broke that General Flynn's lawyer is seeking immunity before Flynn testifies to Congress of the FBI, President Trump tweeted this: Mike Flynn should ask for immunity in that this is a witch hunt, excuse for big election loss, by media and Dems of historic proportion. Daniel, that got this story even rubbed up more.
Look, as Charles said earlier, there's a lot in here that we just don't know what's going on. But if taken on separate levels, I think with General Flynn, given his prior comments about immunity, it really makes you wonder if he, risking his own reputation, risking his own public embarrassment, really has something that he needs immunity for, and why else would he be going out there seeking immunity if not for that reason? That's how it feels at this point, but obviously there's a lot we don't know. And with the president's tweet, likewise, it makes you feel like he is trying to assure General Flynn, don't worry, I've got your back. Don't turn on me, I've got your back. But again, there's a whole lot.
Wait. Are you suggesting you're reading a lot into that tweet?
I'm trying to make sense of it because by itself it doesn't make sense.
Why I got your back? What does that mean?
It means don't flip on me, don't turn on me. But that's assuming that there's something there, and there may not be anything there. It could be that there's nothing there. I'm just saying.
That's too far.
I started off by saying there's a lot that we don't know. These are ways to read the tweets that are really interesting and really provocative. But again, it could be nothing.
What is a little challenging to understand is why the president would tweet talking about Michael Flynn and immunity in the same sentence when the president early on and Sean Spicer basically said, we don't have trust in Michael Flynn anymore. He misled the vice president of the United States. So why bring Michael Flynn back into this
inside the White House
inside the White House when Michael Flynn is no longer part of the White House? And plus, for this immunity, this is about Michael Flynn protecting Michael Flynn. This is about the fact that when you look at his record and the fact that he received thousands of dollars from Russian businesses and from speeches that he gave, and whether he did or did not register as a lobbyist under the FARA Act. I mean, those are the questions that are going to be brought up. So he's trying to protect himself if he's granted this immunity.
But again, you do wonder why the president would touch this with a 10-foot pole.
Why would he do it, especially since the president disconnected himself from Michael Flynn when Michael Flynn, misled the vice president? Makes no sense.
All right, Tim, let's move to another subject we don't know, and that is the question of
my specialty, by the way.
Devin Nunes. And this intel that he got, first he said he got it from a whistleblower, a source whose job might be in jeopardy, and now it turns out that, in fact, he got it at the NSC, right across the street from the White House, from an NSC official. So it seems that he wasn't quite straight about that. And now Devin Nunes, Adam Schiff went today, the Democratic ranking member of the committee, went to the NSC to get the same information, and he came out and he just issued a statement basically saying, he wouldn't say the contents of it, but he said there was nothing there that couldn't be shared with everybody on the committee.
Okay, so here's one of the challenges is trying to make sense of this story every day as America watches. We have, I think, 3 parallel investigations underway, one of which was whether the Russians tried to have an effect on the elections, whether they interfered with the elections. Given the dramatic testimony in the Senate this week, I think it's pretty clear that there's a bipartisan sense that, yeah, the Russians have been doing this for some time and they were trying to. The second is whether or not there was any kind of collusion between the Trump campaign or the Trump transition team and Russia, and there's been no evidence to that effect. A lot of people have smelled smoke. There is an investigation, as we heard last week, from FBI Director Comey. And the third is whether or not, although the debunked claim from President Trump that President Obama wiretapped him, there is still a question of whether there was an inadvertent collection of any kind of intelligence and who did that and how it came out. Again, this is sort of like a big Wheel of Fortune, 3 words, 30 letters, and you only have 2 letters so far. One's an R, one's a D, and they're all playing the game.
I want to buy a vowel.
Yeah. Well, we want to buy a lot of something here because nobody really knows of all of the facts. And I think it's time to take a breath and wait while some of these investigations take place, rather than have Republicans say, well, Democrats, we're accusing you of this, and Democrats accusing Republicans of something. There's just an awful lot that we need to know before we can start making accusations, I think.
Daniel, we're not very good at taking a breath. I mean, and in fairness to us in the media, you got to report something every day, right? And there continue to be developments. Devin Nunes, Adam Schiff, President Trump, Michael Flynn. I mean, there continue to be little breadcrumbs being dropped on this trail.
Yeah, there's actually news happening. I mean, we're not discussing nothing. We're just huge elements of it that are not in the that are just unknown at this point. We don't know what Nunes learned. We don't know what Congressman Schiff learned today. We just don't know what evidence President Trump might have had. We don't know so much, but yet we do know that there are these wild accusations, and we need to get to the bottom of it.
Sadly, I think you've seen the process played out from the House Intelligence Committee with so much political theater and drama around it. So you have Congressman Schiff going on MSNBC basically saying there's circumstantial evidence that there's colluding between the Trump campaign and Russia without even knowing what the findings are. And then you have obviously the incident with Congressman Nunes heading to the White House. Now, in that case alone, in talking with individuals within the House Intelligence Committee, what I learned was the fact that there's false information out there. The fact that this source really wanted to have this confidentiality, guarantee of confidentiality from Congressman Nunes. And so that is why he asked the chairman specifically to be able to share that information, obviously in a secure location. That is a story that I've been told. I don't think it's a story that's gotten out as effectively.
Yeah, but wait. If he's sharing this information in the NSC before NSC officials, why on earth did Devin Nunes need to go back the next day, make this dramatic briefing of President Trump? And why is he briefing President Trump in the first place? He's the head of an independent investigation.
Yes, but as chairman, he has that discretion to do so, and he found that information.
Do you think it's wise for him to be?
I think the process has been messy. I think, unfortunately, it's been so politicized, and I think that for Nunes, it's just the story actually has become more about Nunes and less about the fact that we have a very serious issue that we have to take into play here, which is whether intelligence resources or information were used for political purposes, and what is the extent that the Obama administration has been involved in surveillancing Trump campaign officials.
There's also the continuing investigation of possible collusion between...
That is the other part we need to investigate, and we got to get to the bottom of it. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes, you keep me honest.
There you go. Next up, the Friday lightning round.